him into the world, God's plan of redemption. And whether Jesus was the Messiah, whether he was immaculately conceived or not, which I all believe is all true, I think at this moment in Mary's life, that's not necessarily all important. She right now is feeling the weight of her son dying. And dying in front of her eyes. Listen, I'm a grandfather. Right? I've gone on in life. My mother still worries about me like I was 10 years old. Because that's what mothers do. Right? It's in them. She's always concerned. She's always, well, Keith, how are you doing? I'm doing fine, Mom. Things are good, but I worry about you because that's what mothers do, especially Irish mothers. I'm sure none of the Italian, Greeks, Puerto Ricans, whatever, worry about their kids like the Irish. Of course they do, because that's a mom. And right in front of her son is dying. And at that moment, I don't think to Mary it mattered if he was the Messiah. I don't think this is her firstborn. This is her son. And he's dying. Luke chapter 2, the prophecy of Simeon. When he blessed them, he said to Mary, his mother, "Behold, this child is destined for the fall and rise of many in Israel, which will be a sign spoken against. Yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul also, and the thoughts of many hearts be revealed." That here she's feeling this. I can't imagine. I have watched both my mother and my grandmother bury their children. It's just so unnatural. I remember very specifically, and I'm not doing this for sympathy, I'm just telling you to illustrate the sermon. But I remember when my father died and my grandmother came into the funeral home and she just, my Jack. Just moved because it seems so unnatural to bury a child. We all bury our parents. It's not something we look forward to, but it is a reality. But to bury a child is very different. And here she's watching this and she's seeing her son die right before. This has got to be ripping her up inside. Jesus also, as the firstborn, he was the oldest. He did have other children, siblings, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But he takes this time to minister to his mother. He feels the weight still of this obligation. By all accounts, Joseph is dead. His stepfather, however you want to phrase it, the man who married his mom, however, Joseph he's passed away. He's no longer on the scene. We read about him in the first couple of chapters of Matthew, the first couple of chapters of Luke, but never in the Gospels. When they mention his relatives, it's always his mother and his brothers. His father is no longer on the scene. Stepdad, however you want to say it. Jesus had told the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 15, verses 3 through 6, and he answered and said to them, "Why do you transgress the commandment of God because of your transgressions? Because of your traditions, rather. Why do you transgress the commandments of God because of your traditions? For God commanded, saying, honor your father and mother. And he who curses your mother or your father, let him be put to death. But I say to you, whoever says to his mother and father, what profit that you might receive from me is a gift to God, then you do not need to honor your mother and father. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your traditions." That Jesus said, he put it out, he's nailing the Pharisees, that they're using religion to kind of undermine their obligation to their parents. And he's nailed them on this. He said, you're being false. You get real spiritual when you should be doing something for them. And as a result, he's saying you put tradition over commandment. And here's Jesus dying, that he takes that commandment so seriously that he's going to honor his mother, even though he's dying. Even though he's in pain. 1 Timothy 5:8, but if anyone does not provide for his own household, especially for those, provide for his own, especially those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Jesus could see the need even in his time of greatest need. I don't think you could imagine Jesus Christ having a time of greater need than he's in pain right now. Beat beyond recognition, and all that he's going through. And through his own pain, he can see the needs of others. See, when we're in pain, we usually want the world to know. I'm hurting! Hello! I don't have time for you. I'm in pain. And this has become a mantra and an excuse why people don't have to do right. Because, hey, I'm hurting. Hey, listen. My dad didn't buy me a Lego set when I was 6 years old, so I therefore have a right to burn down your building. There's people who tell you in words that they're in pain. My grandmother, my other grandmother, not the one who, my mother's mother, she was a hypochondriac. If you were sick, she had it, and 10 times worse than you ever did. Yeah. I know none of you have relatives like that. Can't imagine meeting anyone like that. But it was like, come in limping. Oh, what's the matter with you? Stub my toe. Oh, I got my foot ground off by a meat grinder one time. It was horrible. It was, I grew back. It was always worse than you had. And people want to tell you about their pain and all that they're in, and how bad they have it. And this can be emotional pain. You don't know, my parents, they didn't love me like that, and on and on and on and on. It's like, wow. Or some don't say it in word, they say it in attitude. Well, I was just trying to do the best, but apparently that's not good enough. Yeah, I get it. You're in pain, and you want me to feel guilty because I'm not somehow fixing it. It's an attitude. But Jesus can see through his pain. Even what he's going through, he can see through his pain. I wasn't there. I was actually ministering in Lithuania when Sister Mitchell passed away. But Angel Morales, Pastor Jesse's brother, was the Spanish pastor at the time. He said it was quite amazing. Sister Mitchell passed away at 4 o'clock. And at 7 o'clock, Pastor Mitchell came to prayer in the morning. And he's praying for God to help and move and other people. Of course he was in pain. Of course he missed and misses his dear wife of 63 years. Can't, misses. It was great. One time my wife and I were driving Pastor Mitchell around for the San Diego Oceanside Crusade. We were going to the restaurant, and my wife said, "How did you meet Sister Mitchell?" And he says, so that's a great story. So many people think it's this spiritual thing, angels were involved. He actually says, I went to a dance hall with alcohol and everything. They weren't saved. And there she was, and she was the prettiest girl in the place. There you go, angels singing in Hallelujah and planning no. He just said, man, she's the prettiest, I want her, and he got her. And said, God bless him. Jesus doesn't mind actually calling for another to help. We know that Jesus was not in a place to help his mother at this point. But he looks at John and he says, "You're going to help her." Now, think about this. Jesus had half-brothers and half-sisters. In Matthew chapter 13, verses 55 and 56, it says, "Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Jose, Simon, and Judas? And are not his sisters all with us? Where did this man get these things?" So if you read beyond this, he's got 4 brothers mentioned by name. These are the books of James and the books of Jude. That's who wrote those. Jesus' half-brothers. As well as James would become the leader of the church at Jerusalem. That when Peter is out of prison, if you read this in Acts chapter 12, when Peter is released from prison and he goes to Rhoda's house and he says, or he goes to Mary's house and Rhoda doesn't quite answer the door and has to let him in. It's quite a story, great little story on people's great faith of prayer. Even when God answers it right in front of them, they're still not convinced. And he says, "Go and tell James." Well, James, the brother of John, was dead. Herod had killed him. But James that he's talking about is this James. Now, it's very possible that none of them were in Jerusalem at this moment. That they had stayed behind and were in Galilee or Nazareth or wherever they might have been working at the time. This is maybe not evil on their part, that they just weren't there. We don't know where they were. We know they weren't at the cross. John tells us who was there. Maybe they were avoiding the situation. Maybe they knew there was trouble brewing. You read in John chapter 7 where they ask Jesus, "Are you going to the feast?" And he says, maybe, maybe not. And they go, and he shows up later, and there's a big controversy about it. Maybe they're a little bit afraid because in the Gospels it says they didn't believe yet. It does say later that they were in the upper room in Acts chapter 1, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But whatever reason, they're not there. And he sees a woman in need, and he says, "John, I want you to take care of it." You know, God doesn't have a problem asking you to help someone else. He really doesn't have that problem. You know, one man said, and for what it's worth, God couldn't be everywhere physically, so he created moms. I get that. But he also doesn't mind asking you to sometimes help. Would you do? Would you go? Would you assist? Would you take care of it? Because Jesus knows your needs. Jesus knows where you're at. Now, he's looking. I don't know if this struck him in the middle of all his pain. All of a sudden, he sees his mom and he's like, "I got to help her." Or if he knew this going into it, I don't know all that was going on in his mind at this time. But I know that in the pain and in the cross, he can look past all of that, see someone's need. He can see your need. This is an emotional need. Some people write these off. Pastor Mitchell says when he was a young pastor, a woman came to her. He was doing a healing night, and he was praying for people, and someone came and said, the woman said, what do you need? She said, "Oh, I have a broken heart." And he says, "That's not what I'm praying for," and he wondered why. He says, but as he learned in life later, yes, people have broken hearts. People have emotional needs. They have physical needs. They have all sorts of needs. Even though Jesus would rise from the dead, things are going to be different for Mary from now on. It's actually said in tradition that Mary is buried in Ephesus. Now the Catholics will tell you she's ascended into heaven just like Jesus, but because she was a woman, she got a private ascension where Jesus was public. Right, exactly. So, it's insanity. But tradition tells us she's buried in Ephesus because this is where John pastored. That even despite her brothers and different things, because seeing the need is getting someone through a situation. 50 days later or so, in Acts chapter 1, Jesus has ascended into heaven. He's risen from the dead. He's ascended into heaven. They're having a prayer meeting in the upper room. And in verse 13 it says, and when they entered the upper room where they were staying, Peter, James, John, Andrew, Philip, and Thomas, and Bartholomew, and James, and Matthew, and James, the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James. And they all were continued in one accord in prayer and supplications with the woman, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, with his brothers. Jesus risen from the dead now. He probably went and visited them. We don't have that record. We know he visited up to 500 risen from the dead. That Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. But that got her through. Sometimes reaching out to someone in their time of pain can just get them through. That a couple of months later now, she's in prayer. She's going on. This is literally the last time in Scripture that we'll read about her by name. If Jesus hadn't reached out, I wonder if she would have made it there. If John hadn't obeyed, John was given a great privilege to take care of Mary for Jesus. To take her into this, why tradition says she's buried in Ephesus somewhere. That John did take her in, despite the fact that she had 4 sons of her own. So the lesson for us is compassion. One of the words from the cross is compassion. The definition of compassion is the ability to understand the emotional state of another person. Not to be confused with empathy. Compassion has the added element of having the desire to try to alleviate or reduce the suffering of another. Not just feeling their pain, but trying to do something about it. Jesus from the cross, suffering, can't breathe, been whipped, bleeding, beard ripped out, crown of thorns on his head, all the pain, sees the pain of his mother. He says, I've got to do something about that. That's where Jude writes, and some having compassion, making a distinction. Making a difference is what the King James says. Setting apart. Again, Mary isn't a deity. She's not to be worshipped. But I wonder the impact she had in the church. I wonder just how much of a blessing she probably was. And all the result because John was able to hear Jesus speak, because Jesus looked at a woman in need, was able to respond. The needs are everywhere. There's people everywhere. There's situations, whether that's going on an out-of-town outreach to Buffalo or Greece or wherever. If that's reaching out to your neighbor, if that's reaching out to someone in the church, a new convert, someone struggling, maybe an older convert that's not doing well. It's all made possible by the reality that we can, even despite what you might be going through, help it out. I told you you're going to like these things Jesus said on the cross, because that is what this word is about. Maybe you're here this evening and you're not saved, you're not born again. You're not right with God. You've never asked Jesus in your heart, or maybe you did and you turned away and you've gone back and you're playing with the very things that put you in. The good news is Jesus loves you and He wants to help you and change you. If you'd come back, if you'd reach out to God, Jesus, I wonder if you'd slip up your hand very quickly and say, well, that's me. I'm not right with God. Would you pray for me tonight? Anyone at all? Very quickly. We're going to move on in just a moment. The lessons from the cross are endless. They really are. We're only looking at what Jesus said from the cross and how powerful they are. Woman, behold your son. He's not speaking about himself. He's speaking to John. John, behold your mother. And from that day forward, John took her into his house and took care of her. How long that was, I have no idea. But I know that God cares for our needs and doesn't mind asking us to help out in others' needs. If we'll do that, God will be blessed. God will help you. Let's all stand. We're going to sing out a song, worship.